welcome to another episode of The Editorial. I'm joined today by Zach Michaelis, our Editor-in-Chief.
Hello.
And person responsible for all of our output.
Yeah, what a fun thing to be.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, when things are going well.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, it seems like there has been recently. There's not too much to sort of go through today.
No, there isn't. Regular editorial viewers, the rare few of them, will note that we missed the editorial at the middle of last month. We're supposed to do them every 2 weeks, and the last time we did one was at the very end of September, I think. So we've sort of missed one editorial. We're really sorry about that. It has just been a slightly chaotic week, especially chaotic month even, because we've been doing this newspaper thing.
Yes.
That you might have seen advertised in videos. I don't know what this has got a formal title.
The newspaper's called Too Long.
Too Long. Anyway, but since we did our last editorial, we actually haven't had that many controversial videos. So again, regular editorial viewers will know the way we sort of, like a useful proxy for videos' controversialness is its like-dislike ratio. And leaving aside Israel content, because I think we'll get onto that in a second, I don't think we have a single video across all channels that has had a conspicuously low like-dislike ratio in that time. Looking at EU, I think maybe the lowest on EU is the Poland video, which came in at 96%. But we watched that video and I couldn't find anything specific that we got wrong. I think it's just because that result itself is just, there are some people who don't like the result, and they're presumably not just that's the way of expressing dissatisfaction with it. But I don't think it was actually targeted at the content of the video. No. It's a similar thing on EU, although obviously on Global even, although obviously Global has had a lot of Israel content, which has a sort of lower like-dislike ratio, but again, I think we'll get onto that in a second. And finally, the same thing on UK, with one exception, which is the Editorial-Gaza video. But this, again,
what was the like-dislike?
About 95.
Okay.
So slightly below what our average is, about 97, 98, but not terrifyingly low. So because we don't have a whole load of individual videos to review, instead we sort of just got Israel as like a sort of big overarching topic. And there's one video I want to talk about specifically, which is the demographics one, but I think it's worth covering in just sort of the lump of Israel-Gaza conflict. I want to separate this editorial into two parts. Before we get on to talking about Israel, I just want to spend a bit of time sort of reflecting on some of the promises we made to the audience and sort of like to the business in that we did a sort of special editorial video that we released on TLDR Global at the end of September, where we responded to some of the criticism complaints and basically pledged that we would do something to fix them. And a lot of that revolved around the small errors that we see recurring in our videos. So long-time viewers will know that we often have sort of spelling errors in animation, sometimes slightly like sloppy errors in writing, and sometimes errors in narration. So sometimes the narration doesn't flow quite as it's supposed to. And this has been a sort of chronic problem for TLDR that people have got really, really frustrated about, and rightly so. And we pledged in that video to implement some stuff to change them. But what we've done the past month is I've been monitoring where those errors occur. So like where in the sort of like the supply chain of the video do those errors pop up? And to credit to the animators, we've got an animator behind the screen over there who's sorting this out. Very, very few of the errors occur in animation anymore. There used to be quite a few spelling mistakes in animation, but those have been sort of weeded out. And actually, the vast majority of the errors now occur in narration. So it's what happens is a writer will give the narrators a script, and normally the errors that people complain about, the sort of small but nonetheless notable and quite frustrating errors, and also that they undermine the credibility of the TLDR, they normally occur when the narrator simply misreads something that's been given to them. And I don't want to put too much blame on the narrators here because it's quite a big ask. We are asking, in this context, I write and Ben does quite a lot of narration. We as writers are asking you to talk eloquently and sort of, we are asking you to talk eloquently and purposefully about a topic that you just, in some cases, have no prior knowledge of whatsoever, and to pronounce things almost on the fly. I mean, obviously you can do things to mitigate against it, you can research pronunciation, but it's nonetheless a bit alien. And the things that we're going to try to do to remedy these narration errors, there's basically two things. One is that as you might have noticed, I plan on recording the occasional video, especially if it's something that I've written and that it's clearly going to be very difficult for another narrator to narrate it. That's why I've narrated the occasional global video recently. And then also we're going to get writers to sit in on narration. So while a narrator is narrating a writer's video, that writer will come into the room and sit in and just point out, oh no, there, it's supposed to be pronounced like this, or it's supposed to read like that. And hopefully that should clear up some of the errors.
I think just to speak on this as someone who does a lot of the narration as well, the pronunciations are something that we have, we've always struggled with a little bit, just given the amount of content and topics that we sort of cover. You'll go from doing a 10-minute video on Israel and having to pronounce, in some cases, small towns, that very rarely there is any pronunciation guides online for. Often when I'm recording a video, just for those that are interested, you'll get through the script and you'll come across a certain word, and if you haven't already had it explained to you by the writer, this is how you pronounce it, you'll have a look online and practice it a couple of times and try and get it right. Obviously, sometimes though, there just isn't a pronunciation guide, and the writer may have seen that word written when they've been doing their research, but they haven't seen it spoken. So sometimes there are situations where there is sort of no playbook to go with. And I know we often get comments of, oh, you can use Google Translate and have a little audio thing, but that does only work so well.
Yeah.
And especially if it's like a town name, Google they can do words, but if it's a town name or a politician's name or an MP or something like that, like it can still struggle. So, there are ways of mitigating that, and we are, I think we're getting better with that. And notably, I think last year, especially with certain very basic Ukraine ones, we made some errors.
I think
we're getting there.
I think we are getting there. And I also think that it's worth saying, of course, in advance, that this is not going to be perfect. Like we are still going to make the occasional error, but as always, we will just come back here and apologise for it. And I suppose that's sort of the best we can do. The other thing to say is that hopefully we're hiring new writers, and hopefully introducing a bit more slack in the writing system should reduce the error rate. So that means that we should have fewer writing errors, fewer narration-related errors. The final sort of category of error is animation error, so that's normally just sort of misspellings on the animation. In the animator's defense, those are very rare these days. That we did have a problem with that in the past, but those are very rare. Lots of people suggest that we should just have someone watch the video over before it goes out. Just that isn't really possible because it involves re-uploading, and it essentially involves re-uploading a video, and because we run such a tight schedule, there just isn't really time for that.
I would just like to jump in there as well and say that is something, a similar point is made with the narration as well, which is that people sometimes say, I'm from Ukraine, I can help you with pronunciations, or I'm I have an Israeli background, and often we get those messages and people see it as like a common sense solution to the problem. And on the surface, I can totally see why it seems like that. But you are right that there is, if you look at the amount of content we put out compared to other YouTube channels who have much more staff, much more flex in the system, we put out so much content each week. And there just isn't the slack in the system available to be able to finish the script, then have it sent off, wait however long it takes them to read it through and check all of the, the pronunciations to then redo it. It's just, it's news content. It has to get, the difference between this and other YouTubers is the promptness and the speed at which we need to be able to get things out in order for it to stay relevant. And the slack doesn't exist either for that solution that people suggest for narrating, or as you say, for the animating thing either.
Yeah, exactly. So all in all, hopefully the rate of errors should go down over the coming months. I really do think it will. I think it's already gone down somewhat, but nonetheless, we would like to apologise because we have made some errors in the past month or so, and we probably will make some in the future. But as was always the case on this, I would like to apologise for the errors that we've made in the past month, because we have made quite a few narration errors. Again, in the last few videos, especially in some of the Israel videos. But again, hopefully those will be somewhat remedied by these new changes. Anyway, with that all being said, I think that clears that up. On to the second part of this video, which is just to talk about Israel and how we cover Israel. before we get into how we do this, just on the like-dislike ratio, so our normal like-dislike ratio for a video is probably like 97, 98%. And I'd say the baseline with Israel content is still pretty high. It's still pretty high, like 96%. I think we actually find it a lot easier than most news outlets to report on Israel and Gaza, mainly because of the fact that we're not running a 24-hour, sort of 24/7 fast news business. I think that's when most, especially like legacy media outlets, lose credibility, is when they're chasing a story sort of as it's happening. And because there's such sort of information fog in Gaza, you often end up making, they're very understandable mistakes, but they're nonetheless still mistakes that really undermine your credibility. I mean, you saw this with, I think the hospital bombing was one that had lots of legacy media outlets sort of twisting and turning and getting themselves into all sorts of knots. And I think basically the fact that we're reporting with at least a 12-hour time lag just means that there's a bit more time for the fog to clear and for like the outlines of the truth to become apparent. And so actually I don't think our Israel coverage has been that controversial. The like-dislike ratio is still pretty high, and most of the things people take issue with are more to do with the sort of silly small errors or pronunciation errors.
It also, with that delay, let's just take a step back and see what debates are sort of happening to do with language and things like that. Because obviously, originally in the conflict, there was this big debate about Hamas and how to describe them. And I don't think our video, or the first video we properly did about it, I think we were able to sort of take a step back and see, what how media are describing them and what the sort of consensus is of what language to use. So I think, just to add to what you were saying, it means that we're not having to engage in those debates, because by the time we make the videos, they're usually settled and we can take the consensus view.
The one sort of exception to that rule, I think we got more pushback on the demographics video. I don't know if you remember this, but we put that out quite early in the conflict. And for those of you who didn't watch the video, the demographics video was talking about how, essentially three things, is how the high fertility rate amongst the sort of Arab population in Gaza, the high fertility rate amongst the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel, and then the lower fertility rate amongst the sort of more secular population in Israel, have all contributed to the tensions and ultimately the violence that we're seeing in Gaza. There were sort of two different points of contention. One was to do with the thumbnail, and the title on the thumbnail was "This graph explains the Gaza conflict." And I completely understand why people took issue with that thumbnail. I think it's a very classic YouTube thumbnail, but in retrospect, and we had a conversation, me and Jack had a conversation about this in the office, but in retrospect, I do think that was too clicky, too clickbaity, and I also think that the implication is just too reductive. It's just, it's unacceptably reductive. One graph can't explain the Israel-Gaza conflict. That is a nonsense. And so I would like to apologise to that, and I was wrong to go ahead with that thumbnail.
When you say you had a and maybe we can cut this if this isn't a conversation you want, but was this a disagreement between the two of you, or are you both having a conversation about how best to present a thumbnail like that, one that is suggesting, that is, as you've described, reductionist? Is it that one of you was describing it as such, or
we'll cut this? But Jack said, let's do this graph explains the Gaza crisis, and I went, and then he went, no, that'd be good, and I was like, okay, fine, that'd be good, let's do it.
Okay. But cut that.
Yeah. Because it'd be funny if that goes in. The whole thing with us being like, cut it. And the other point of contention on that was just that I think there was this sense that talking about demographics, especially so soon after the October 7th attacks, can feel, again, reductive, but also just insensitive. And I think it sort of ignores the human suffering. I understand that. I don't think there's a right answer here. I think, unfortunately, it might feel a bit insensitive. It is just true that demographics are really analytically significant. They aren't just informative, so I think it is important to cover them and to look at them. There's also a risk that sort of cuts the other way, which is that you can, as a journalist, I don't know if I get to describe myself in those terms, but as a journalist, you can get sort of too emotional. So I appreciate that there was this feeling that it might feel a bit sort of it just feels insensitive, and it just sort of feels like too zoomed out in a way from the human suffering on the ground. But you equally don't want to be too zoomed in. And I don't really know where the sort of Goldilocks zone is there in this like zoomed out, zoomed in analytic. But I don't think we necessarily did anything wrong in terms of the actual content of the video. I do think the thumb was unpalatable and just to too great an extent. But I think the content was fine. I should say, finally on the Israel stuff, obviously I basically start this whole thing by saying that actually I think our coverage has been relatively uncontroversial. But if there is anything that you think we've missed, any glaring errors you think we might have made that we should address, please do mention in the comments, and then we can bring those back up at the next editorial. Part of this is just that there has been so much Gaza content, and the comments are so busy that it's quite hard to sort of like tease out individual issues with scripts. But from what I've been, the scanning I've done, I couldn't find any sort of glaring individual errors. So, but please, if we've missed anything, do leave a comment down below, and we'll address it in the next one. I think that is sort of it.
Yeah.
If you're happy with that.
Yeah, I think it's good that we're having fewer specific instances of videos dropping below the low 90% like dislike ratio. The fact that as this goes on, we've got less and less to discuss, and the fact that, as I say, with the Israel content, that's more like a broad thing to discuss, and it's only really sort of specific errors across the board. So I think, if anything, it's showing that we are improving, and that the processes are working. But as you say, we've got plans to try and reduce the narration errors further, and to try and make sure that the content isn't incorrect in the way that sometimes it has been in the past. So so all very positive, I think, overall. Yeah,
all in all. So I think 2 apologies. I would like to apologise again for the thumb on the demographics. I am sorry about that. I thought that was slightly beyond the pale. And I would also like to apologise for the smaller, sloppier errors that we've seen a couple of in the last month. Not too many, but nonetheless, I'd like to apologise for those, and insist that they will be getting better in the months to come. So, well, thank you for watching the editorial, and see you again in 2 weeks.